circularlo a sus amigos, puedan compartirlo. So everyone is aware we're going to be recording this so that if after the event you wanted to get a copy or circulate it to other people you think might be interested in learning more about the issue, that you can do so. And just, I know we can put in the chat, but if there's anybody, we're going to do the presentation in Spanish. But if you guys have anybody who wants to do it, would prefer us to do it in English, I can function as a translator. Sorry, it's going to be in English, but I can translate into Spanish if you have any questions. So if there's any issue that you would like us to translate into Spanish, and also for the questions and answers, we will be answering in Spanish. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron and Michael.
All right. Thank you for having us on the webinar. One thing that Michelle didn't tell you is that we worked together once upon a time as baby lawyers, and it's a privilege to know somebody for as long as I've known Michelle, and she does great work, and it's great to see our careers develop to where they've gotten. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully you can all see this. So you may recall seeing this video in the news, and I'll explain why I'm showing it to you. So that video was showing the Champlain Towers building collapsing in Miami Beach, technically Surfside, in 2021. It was one of the greatest tragedies in the United States in terms of personal injury and wrongful death. Our firm represented one of the families that brought one of the major claims in that case. This photo that you see here is what resulted from that. That matter resolved about a year later, roughly, for just over $1 billion. And the reason I'm showing you this, and that I think it's so important, is because so many of those people, nearly 100 who passed away, left survivors who were foreign nationals. A lot of the people that lived in that building were not citizens in the United States, and that particular building was not their primary residence. So they were left scrambling to understand what their rights would be if they wanted to bring a claim in the United States. And it was confusing. It was complicated. There were a lot of companies responsible. And it became very important to understand what rights you would have if you don't live here, if you've never lived here, and if you plan on living here in the future. So that's just one example of a type of personal injury claim that we would handle, but it goes from anywhere from a slip and fall where you break a bone all the way to something as catastrophic as this. I'll give you a few more examples, and then I'll explain what rights you may have as a foreign national if you want to bring a claim and if something happens to you or a loved one in the United States. So I'm joined here today by my associate Michael Bild and law clerk Ladies Almaguer. They've worked with my firm for several years, and we look at cases together in a very detailed, sophisticated way. And a lot of the work that we do together, the three of us, deals with foreign nationals, a lot of survivors, a lot of loved ones that don't live in the United States. And they want to know, hey, if I come to Florida or one of my family members do, what do I do? Here's another example of a type of case that we would handle. This is a case where a Tesla caught fire and burned two people inside a vehicle who both passed away. That's called a product liability case, where you try to understand if there's a defect in a particular product. And there's more. Here's another case that we've handled. In this particular one, we represent foreign nationals who are citizens of Cuba. There are issues, immigration issues involved with that, issues that involve their inability to come to the United States to visit or to attend trial. In this particular case, there was an accident in West Texas where a young man lost his life when two semi-trucks collided in snow and ice storms. And we deal with the family in Cuba, and there's communication issues that come out of that, and we have to explain things in a very simple way so that they can understand them. My law clerk, Ladies, is heavily involved in that communication process and can probably lend some insight into that. Ladies, what are your thoughts on that process, dealing with foreign nationals and citizens of Cuba in a case pending in the United States?
Well, the process for Cuban nationals, it's extremely hard. However, we have been able to navigate the system, being creative and being very active to inform our clients what their rights are, how we can do things the right way so they can get the compensation that they're entitled to. Because although the communication between Cuba and the United States is terrible, we have found a way to connect with them and move the case forward, and just we haven't had so far we haven't had an issue that hasn't been resolved because they are in Cuba.
Yeah. I'll add to that because I think it's important. You know, oftentimes when you have cases that involve foreign nationals, they may not understand the distinction between a criminal case and a civil case. A lot of people may ask you, well, how are you getting me justice against the person that caused this injury or this wrongful death? The focus can sometimes be blurred between a crime and a civil lawsuit where you're trying to recover money. And one of the challenges in explaining that is distinguishing between the two, and in doing so, conveying to family members how sorry you feel for what they've been through. You have to have a tremendous amount of sympathy for what people are going through, while at the same time delivering in a message to a foreign national or whoever the survivors are, that while you have sympathy, while you feel terrible for this kind of tragedy, I mean, truly terrible, that you won't allow that to cloud your ability to represent them, to understand the cases, and to understand what you need to accomplish to get them the best result. So these are some of the other kinds of cases that we handle as a firm. Obviously, auto negligence cases, we just talked about that. Premises liability, that's where just somebody basically falls, is the most common example. If there's something wrong with the ground, or there's a danger in a parking lot or at any kind of event. Negligent security also fits in that category. Those are cases where somebody is the victim of a crime and a private company has an obligation to protect them from a crime being committed by the criminal. And we have a lot of examples of those kinds of cases, and they are very common in South Florida, and they commonly occur with foreign nationals who may not be familiar with certain neighborhoods that they're going to, in our case in Miami, but certainly other potentially dangerous neighborhoods around the country. Another common type of claim that we'll bring is medical malpractice, which, as you might infer, involves a situation where a medical provider, a doctor or a nurse, provides a certain kind of treatment and may not fulfill their obligations within an industry standard. And in doing so, there is an injury or a death. Anything from an elective surgery to repair a broken bone, to emergency intervention to treat somebody having a heart attack. Hospitals and medical providers have obligations to take care of patients within a certain criteria. And if they don't fulfill that duty that they sign up for, there may be a lawsuit that results. You don't bring claims all the time for these things, but when the violation is egregious, it's certainly something where you want to be aware of the rights that you may have. The next thing I'll talk about, now that we talked about a little bit of the background of the types of cases we handle, is what does the process look like? If you're a foreign national, if you're coming here for the first time or for work or even consistently, what are the stages of litigation? You know, how does it go from start to finish? One of the most important parts of the litigation is actually before the litigation starts, which is called the demand phase. In the demand phase, we put together a summary of the information we've learned with a request for money. And it's not always because we expect the money to be paid. It's we're putting somebody on notice so that they understand if they don't pay, what's going to be coming to them. And part of that process is also doing an investigation, which is the most critical part of putting together the litigation that you'll be in potentially for a long period of time. And Michael and I are involved in many cases where we do a deep investigation before we pursue the lawsuit. He can lend his insight into how that works and some examples as well. Michael?
Thanks, Aaron. As Aaron mentioned, the demand phase is really the demand and the investigation phase. Many times when we have the initial meeting with the client, we don't even know at that point who may be responsible for the incident. And just to give you an example, we're handling a very tragic case right now where a young woman was killed in a car accident. An individual was driving on the wrong side of a highway and crashed head on into our client. As you would expect, the person who is most responsible for that incident is the driver who is driving on the wrong side of the highway. And many clients think that's the only person who's responsible. I'm only going after that individual. But many times that's not the case. You have to ask additional questions like, was that person working at the time? Because if he was, then maybe you can get the employer on the hook. Where was that person coming from? Was he coming from a bar? Was he drinking? Did that bar serve him in excess? Maybe the bar can be responsible. Was there construction around that area? Were there confusing signs where an individual didn't know where an entrance and an exit ramp was? Maybe the construction company can be responsible. So that investigation phase is very crucial. And most of our clients come to us because we think outside the box. We hire an investigator and we dig through every hole and we find every single person or entity that may be responsible. And some theories are very creative, and that's kind of where our expertise comes in. So that initial phase is extremely important. And many of our clients are surprised to learn, hey, there may be these other companies that may be more responsible than the at-fault driver. And so that initial phase, which happens before any lawsuit is filed, is an extremely crucial phase. And we just want to make everyone aware that it's not always so clear who may be responsible at the very beginning. A deep investigation has to take place.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll add, before I get to the next phase, which is the lawsuit, I have to convey to you that transition from demand to lawsuit separates most law firms apart. And what I mean by that is most firms, especially the ones that put up billboards and run commercials, don't necessarily want to go from demand to lawsuit. They want to demand money, move to the next thing, and move as quickly as possible. Tell you that they're the biggest, that they're the best. But the firms that you want to bring in, when you look for a firm to represent you, you want one that is going to be able to convince whoever you're going to go after that that firm will go the distance to trial. Not that it will go to trial, but every case should be looked at to see if we go to trial, will we be successful, and are we willing to do it? So that's something to keep in mind. You know, you have your your life in the hands of a law firm. They need to be able to take care of you. They need to be able to go the distance. They need to respond to emails, and they need to pick up the phone. There are practical implications to getting yourself involved in a claim or a lawsuit. And some of them aren't necessarily being familiar with the law itself and what rights you have, but who do I go to? What's important? How responsive is the company that I hire, the law firm I hire, going to be? That's a big deal. The last thing you need to be doing is chasing somebody down to get back to you. So with that, the next process that we'll talk about is the lawsuit, which is exactly what you would think. You file a complaint or a demand for arbitration, and that is the inception of putting an individual or a company on notice that they did something wrong, and you are seeking a judgment to make them pay you as a result of that wrong. During that lawsuit phase, you'll engage in a process called discovery. That's where you ask questions of witnesses, you ask questions of a company. Did you do the right thing? Did you do the wrong thing? Was this incident your responsibility? This building coming down, the defect in the parking lot, the thing that made my car crash, whatever it is, you need to be able to ask these critical questions under oath so that when you go to trial, you can tell a jury, this is how these people responded, and they need to stick to it. At that point, you're basically getting ready for trial if the matter hasn't resolved, but there's usually one opportunity to try and settle it formally before trial. That process is called mediation. That's where the parties all get together in one room, or in the modern age, a Zoom room or something similar, and the parties discuss a potential resolution. And if that resolution doesn't happen because a defendant doesn't realize the exposure in the case, for example, you got to be ready for trial. You can't be in a situation where you're trying to figure out, well, they didn't want to pay us. What do I do? And that trial is the last step. And it can be a long process, and one that you want to be prepared for, basically, when you're already putting together that demand. So here's some examples of some matters that we've handled recently. Last year, we tried a case, went to trial. We got a verdict against a company, a bar that overserved a drunk driver who went the wrong way on a highway, and it resulted in a $95 million verdict for a family that wasn't sure they were going to get anything. It was a very long litigation, took 5 or 6 years, and you don't always bring justice for a family, but it was very meaningful to be able to do that. And we updated them along the way on all the pros and cons of going to trial, and that was certainly a big success for that family. Other things that we've accomplished, we've gotten judgments for bad faith. Sometimes an insurance company that represents another company doesn't protect it. The reason you have insurance as a person or as a corporation is to protect you if you do something wrong, or if you might have done something wrong. If that insurance company doesn't protect you and fulfill their duty to you, that insurance company itself can be in trouble. And that is an entire practice area of litigation that we are familiar with. And unfortunately, insurance companies, in our view, are doing that more and more often. I'll move to the next slide. Something else that's very important. When you're dealing with foreign nationals, people that don't speak the primary language of the case, of the location where the case is being tried, it's hard enough just to get by to articulate what you're going through, and it's even harder to articulate the severity of the injuries that you may have sustained. So what you'll want to do is put together illustrations like the ones that you see on my screen that convey not only what you might not be able to articulate, but what you might not be able to see. A lot of things happen inside the human body. For medical malpractice cases where somebody's got a heart condition, you can't see that through somebody's shirt. You've got to have an illustration that shows the human anatomy like you have here. What's actually being done to repair bones? What is that process like? There's a big difference between a scan or an X-ray like you see on the right versus an illustration that explains what that X-ray or scan actually is. A huge difference. And it may be the difference between succeeding in your case and not, because if the jury doesn't understand it, they're not going to award money for it. Same goes for liability, not just the injuries themselves, but what happened in the incident. If a jury doesn't understand it because the explanation doesn't provide an image in their mind, a visual image, then it's going to be hard to convince that jury or that insurance company or that corporation to pay money to compensate you for what you've been through. So what you see on the screen is a matter that we were involved in that had to do with a rollover incident. And this is a type of animation. We do them in the daytime, in the nighttime. They capture little intricacies of the roadway and landscaping conditions and lighting. These all go into this process, and it needs to be done very carefully. A lot of these cases are highly publicized in the news, and defendants take them seriously, and they need to be taken that way on the plaintiff's side as well. So the whole point of this is to address, if I'm a foreign national, now that you have sort of a view of what the litigation landscape looks like, what rights do you have? What can you actually collect money for? Well, if it's a personal injury case and nobody dies, you can recover money for wages. Wages that you didn't get because of an injury in the past, and wages that you aren't going to get in the future as a result of that same injury. The reason I have that highlighted in red is because your right as a foreign national to recover wages is based on your right to legally work in the United States. So you'll need to prove when you're here that you are legally entitled to make the money that you're missing out on as a result of your injury. A similar circumstance exists as to medical bills. You have a right to recover your medical bills in the past and what you might need in the future if you bring a personal injury case. But it's very important to know, where are you getting that work done? Because the cost of getting a medical procedure done in Canada or Cuba or Mexico or Venezuela or China may be very different than those same types of procedures in the United States. So it's something to keep in mind that when you ask for money, a lot of it is based on where are you allowed to work and where are you getting your medical care. The major item, which is the 5th bullet point down, is called pain and suffering. That's what most people think about when they're involved in a lawsuit arising out of injuries. I suffered, I was in pain, I was upset, and I had to live with this for a long time, and I'll have to live with it for a long time going forward. That is the most significant factor in most personal injury cases. The last one that I will talk about is called punitive damages. That is a rare remedy that some courts award throughout the United States, and in particular in Florida. And punitive damages are damages that a jury may award to punish a defendant for committing an act of gross negligence. Gross negligence basically means that a defendant has basically ignored and been indifferent to the life and safety of the people whom they were supposed to protect. There are a lot of nuances to that, but basically, if a defendant knowingly ignores a danger that they either know or should know about, a jury may be able to punish them with extra money that should deter that future behavior, that extra money being awarded to the person who actually suffered the harm. The other type of personal injury litigation is wrongful death. While it's really the same thing, you are allowed different types of damages if somebody dies. In general, the people that are allowed to collect as a result of somebody's death are parents and children of the person who passed away. You can recover money for the loss of support and services, which means if somebody was doing the laundry, picking up the kids from school, cleaning the house, there are costs associated with having to replace those services. Florida's wrongful death statute, for example, and most wrongful death statutes throughout the United States afford a plaintiff an opportunity to recover the value of those services. Other types of damages that you can recover are what are called loss of net accumulation, which is basically lost wages in the form of what the person who passed away would have saved for the rest of their life. You can also recover for medical and funeral expenses. So all of these are different categories that a foreign national or a citizen or a resident can recover in personal injury cases and wrongful death cases in the United States. And the first step, if you're involved in one of these situations, is to sort of understand those rights and what you can seek to accomplish if, God forbid, something happens to you or a loved one here. So with that, I will open this up to any questions that you may have, and I will address those, or Michael or ladies will address them. And I appreciate your time.
Alessia, do you want to open up the chat? If anyone has any questions, si tienen alguna pregunta o duda, pueden hacerlo en el chat. If you have a question, you can feel free to post it in the chat, and we'll have Aaron and Michael address directly. Okay, I guess we don't have any questions. Aaron, Michael?
I saw
Somebody raised their hands.
Oh, okay, I guess I can't see on my end. Sorry, I'll let you guys.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Okay, I try to do the chat, but it's disabled.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to answer your question verbally. I prefer that over a chat. So feel free.
Okay, when you said about the wrongful death, and you said that the only people that can claim that would be only children and the parents, so the spouse is not wouldn't be allowed to.
So a spouse is allowed to recover damages. I was giving an example. A spouse can recover damages for a wrongful death as well.
Okay. Can I ask another question?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. When you mentioned, hold on, let me get the thing. When you mentioned the loss of wages with personal injuries thing,
Yeah.
does that apply only for people who have permit to work in the United States?
Can you ask that question one more time?
So let's say somebody has a personal injury and they're losing wages due to that, right?
Yeah.
And they don't have a permit to work in the United States. So they're getting paid, let's say their compensation is cash. Would they be able to go into any type of case like this? Like, would they be able to claim for lost wages?
If the injury took place in the United States, they could bring a claim. But if they don't have a permit to be able to work in the United States, that claim cannot include a claim for wages. There are some exceptions to that. However, it is possible if they are able to get a permit in the future, or they're showing that they're making efforts in order to do so, there may be entitlement to wages in the future. But unless
okay, my question goes because a couple of years ago, a friend of mine was working doing roofing things, and he fell.
Yeah.
He fell from the roof, and he broke parts of his leg. And they, the boss helped him pay for medical damages because they had to do surgery on the foot.
Yeah.
But he definitely ended up losing work for like more than a month. I think it was like maybe 2 or 3 months, you know? So like in that type of scenario, he doesn't have a work permit.
Yeah, so there may not be an entitlement to recover wages as a result of that. I suspect there isn't, but there's the rule, and then there's the practical implication.
Okay.
What I would do in a scenario like that, or what I'd consider doing, is explaining to a jury that this guy got hurt because he was engaged in a job where he's not actually entitled to earn wages as a result of getting injured. And I would ask a jury to consider compensating that person that value in the form of pain and suffering.
Okay.
So even though you can't make a wage claim, the inability to earn money can be a component of your pain and suffering. It may not be in the form of economic damages, but that would probably be an angle I would take in a case like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I think we've enabled the chat now, but if you're having trouble, there is a raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. Feel free to raise your hand and ask a question directly if you have one. Si tienen alguna pregunta, pueden permitir levantar su mano donde dice raise hand abajo y les podemos actualizar el micrófono para que hagan preguntas. Voy a activar el micrófono de cada uno que quiera para que pueda hablar directo. I'm going to activate the microphone for everyone so you can ask questions directly if you like.
See people popping in now.
Yeah, I just activated everyone's microphone, so anybody who would like to ask a question can simply unmute and ask a question directly. Well, if nobody then has any more questions, thank you so much, Aaron and Michael and ladies, for joining us today. We will circulate the recording to the attendees as well as to our client list. Feel free to share it with your friends or people who you think might be interested in the subject or need the help of exceptional attorneys like Aaron and Michael. And you know, feel free to reach out to us if you need their contact information, but we'll provide it as well in the email. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, today.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
have
you,
a wonderful
everyone.
day.
Thanks.
Enjoy your long weekend, everyone.